For more on that, Rebecca Gerrard joins me from New York. She is the legislative director with Citizen Action of New York. That is a grassroots organization tackling social issues. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining our program today.
Thank you, Francis.
Well, Rebecca, what will be the impact of this Supreme Court decision, considering there are many still here in the U.S. that are struggling financially from this pandemic?
Yes, the impact will be devastating. Let's be clear. We have approximately 1.2 million renter households who are at risk of eviction right now, and the only protection they had against that was the CDC moratorium or some state-level protections. And so with the CDC moratorium being struck down by the Supreme Court, we are once again on the precipice of a housing crisis. And as you pointed out, which intersects with the rise of the Delta variant and a public health crisis.
And Rebecca, as you know, this impact will be felt along gender and racial lines. Can you explain more about that, why they are most at risk?
Yes, we know because of the disproportionate impact that we already saw in this country in terms of socioeconomic issues, right, being felt along racial and ethnic lines. We know Black renters are 2 to 3 times more likely to be at risk of not being able to pay rent than their white counterparts. We know that Asian and Latino renters are 1.5 to 2 times more likely to not be able to pay rent. So when we see this crisis unfold, we know that we will see that disproportionate impact in regards to homelessness, displacement, and all of the educational, occupational impacts that go along with that.
So there's a big social impact on this as well, right?
That is correct.
Well, let's talk about this moratorium. This was kind of a lifeline, the last lifeline for a lot of people. So, I mean, do they have any recourse, a lot of these renters? Are there any other types of sources of funding that they could potentially tap into?
Yeah, really, this is so troubling because we have the nearly $50 billion that the federal government earmarked for rent relief in recognition of this crisis. And yet still we have just around 10% of that, which has been able to be distributed across the country, about $5 billion. And so we have enormous sums of money still on the table that could be used to ensure that tenants are able to pay their rent, to stabilize small landlords who rely on that income. And yet instead of having these protections in place to allow that process to play out, we're now in a situation where those are lifted, and that's bad for tenants and landlords. Tenants are going to be in not just a housing crisis, but a public health crisis, which will affect everyone. But also, once a tenant is no longer in place, a landlord loses that ability to recoup the funds that they haven't received. So at this point, it's really imperative that the legislature act. As we know, the Supreme Court ruled that it was not in the CDC's purview to enact a moratorium, but they did not weigh in on whether the legislature could.
We'll have to see how that plays out. Such a difficult situation for so many people. Rebecca Gerrard with Citizen Action of New York, thank you so much for breaking it down for us.
Thank you, Francis.